Welcome to the Color of Success podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie J. Wong. Many of us are feeling a wide range of emotions: sadness, anger, fear, sometimes hopelessness and helplessness. This season, we will be exploring all the feelings and ways to empower each other to take action. So, let's go. Game on. Julia, thank you so much for joining me today on Color Success. Really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure to be here, Stephanie. Nice to meet you.
I love all the books in your background. I'm an avid reader, and so this is really amazing to see.
Yeah, and it's actually a real bookcase.
For the listeners, they are real books.
There's a funny story to my books because, I have been an avid reader since I was a kid, and I'm a Gen Xer, so it's many decades. And I've lived in several homes, and one of which was in London for 18 years.
Yeah.
And books are very heavy. Books are like the heaviest possible boxes you could have. And I remember these movers, each time I moved, it was just this onerous burden for them, more so than my husband's recording equipment. But I think they've always been like a security blanket for me, and almost like a calendar. Like if I pull out a book and, I don't have any hard and fast rules about not writing in the margins. I kind of like investing the book with my experience of the moment, underlining things, and just sometimes when I go back to them and I see what I've written, I'm like, wow, was that me?
It hits differently. Yeah, at different times in your
does.
life.
Yeah, but it's a therapy. I know you're a clinical psychologist, but it's always been therapy for me. It's unfortunate that I've fallen off a bit, but
It's hard these days. Yeah, I really like physical books. And so a lot of times when I'm approached to, interview an author or whatnot, I'm like, can you please send me the physical book? Because it's just, we're always on the computer all the time. And I just love that physical aspect. But again, I'm a millennial, so I grew up with like actual physical books. These kids, and I have kids, so these kids are like, what's on the iPad from the library? And I'm just like, well, let's go to the library. So,
Yeah, those summers in the library, that they were like my only refuge sometimes. But that was a different age.
yeah. Well, you come from a literary background, and so I'm curious, like, what got you into now coming into the family business? I have your wonderful bag in the back, and I just loved trying the products. Before we get started, like I'm going to dig in here a little bit. This like foot pumice stone is so good. I use the commercial one, and it's like a cheese grater. And then I was like, okay, let's try this out. And it did not hurt. I was like, this is so effective. So yeah, please tell me how you came into into this business.
Yeah, coincidentally, that is one of my favorite products of the line as well. It's just so unassuming, and you do
Mhm.
not think that it does what it does, but it's remarkable. So, um, but yeah, so I have had kind of, I guess, a sinuous path in life. And, my parents immigrated to America from Seoul, Korea, when in the early 70s. So from Seoul to Flushing, Queens. And I was about 4 years old. And my dad has always had this entrepreneurial spirit. And even when he was in Korea, he was going to, different countries, like he was thinking of doing the lumber business, just a world traveler, a globetrotter. And his next mission, he was actually working for Pan Am. And so he landed in New York, and then kind of chose New York as home base. We had the decision between New York and California, and my mother's like, "No, let's stay in New York." Um, but so he started kind of an agency. He wanted to be the intermediary between Asian countries and America, and just being, importing items and packaging them and selling them. And in fact, he was the first person to bring the loofah sponge, the vegetable gourd,
Mhm.
from China to America. And he packaged them as a bath sponge and he sold them into Dwayne Reed. And so ever since then, they started in the early 70s. The company was incorporated in the early 70s, actually 1976 in May to be exact. And yeah, so I am the daughter of the entrepreneurs, kind of American dream, early 70s, $5 in my pocket, coming to America, entrepreneurs. And as is often the case, at least for me, I did not want anything to do with it.
Yeah.
It's like, it probably, the kids of accountants or kids of, artists want to be accountants, that's just the way that things worked. But I always wanted to be a writer. And I ended up going into journalism. I was I was the editor of my high school newspaper and literary journal. I ended up wanting to study journalism, but at some point, I just didn't want the things that I worked so hard on to be like yesterday's news. And so I happened upon the classics. And, I wanted to know, like, what is it about a classic that endures the test of time? Why are we still reading Homer? And, some of the tragedians from, 6th, 5th century BC, why are they still around? And so that was like my big question. And ended up going to graduate school for my PhD, realizing I wasn't really cut out for the politics of academia. Wanted to be a little more creative, so I got my MFA at NYU and met my husband, moved to London, had a child, and it wasn't exactly how I thought my life would kind of end up, but I spent about 15 good years raising my child, being a kind of a stay-at-home mom. And that was it was almost like a kind of a renaissance for me. I learned a lot of things and, serving an individual. And I wanted her to come to college in America. And it was exactly when COVID struck,
Mm.
and I really felt like London was changing. I felt like that was my only time to just get off a ship and get back to America. And I wanted to be with my family. My brother John, who actually started Earth Therapeutics, was very, very ill with COVID.
Mm.
It was a crisis situation. And I think, because my parents endured the Korean War, I think it was just very triggering,
Yeah.
the trauma of it. And I just felt that when I was having these video calls with them. And so that's how I ended up back in New York after 18 years in London. And I did work for my brother, in PR and marketing about 30 years ago when he started the company. And he had done so well, and the company had grown so much since I was in London. But he didn't have the bandwidth to really expand sort of the digital aspect or the digital sales and, the digital PR of the business. And that's what he asked me to come and help him do. So that's how I ended up back in the family fold. To quote Pacino in The Godfather, every time you try to get away. But yeah, so that's my circuitous path back.
But it is a path in your own journey, and I'm very curious. I've been to London, I think 2 summers ago. And fun fact is I'm licensed in New York and California because my business partner lives in New York. So we have a group practice. But tell me about what it was like to raise a child in London and how you saw it different than like your childhood, perhaps, or even the similarities.
Wow, that is that is such a tremendous question, and no one has really asked me.
Mm.
Um, you know, So it was the second time I was an immigrant. And
Mm.
even though I was very prepared for it, and, I honestly thought I'm just going to another English speaking country. How hard can it be? And I think that that very simplistic, kind of paving over of the cultural differences really threw me for a loop because they're two completely different cultures. And I also feel like, as I immigrated from Korea to America when I was 4, it was like this kind of like a abrupt deracination. I never really got to process it. One day I was a kid, running around barefoot in Seoul. And next day I was eating a slice of pizza on Main Street in Flushing. And I still recall how strange bread and cheese and tomato sauce tasted.
Pizza's very different in Korea. It's
Well, no, they didn't have pizza in
yeah,
Korea.
back in the day, but even now, the pizza's very, very different.
Yeah, yeah. I was a kid, having, eaten rice and kimchi, and then here I am
Yeah.
eating pizza. But I think it kind of brought that whole experience flooding back, which I did not anticipate, because it had not really been fully processed and, put away and integrated. London was a great place to have a child as an immigrant because I was there alone with my husband. I
Mhm.
didn't have extended family, but we had the NHS. And I know that I think, outsiders, especially Americans, who haven't experienced the National Health Service, may have some preconceived notions of it, but it was just the most brilliant system. It was, first of all, free.
Yeah, number
And
one.
number one, didn't have to deal with anything like insurance. If I needed a doctor, I could just call them the same day and just have to cross the street to the doctor's office. But they took really good care of me, natal care and natal classes and yeah, I mean, and then after I had the baby, they would send a midwife to come and make house calls to make sure I was breastfeeding properly. Like they encouraged a lot of the natural. They don't really do C-sections unless they have to. They encouraged like natural childbirth, which I couldn't do, but
Me
and
neither.
breastfeeding. And I was just all thumbs, as a new mom in a new country, and they were there for me, telling me how to do this and that, and the education system is also very different. I had to take I'm actually a dual citizen because I was there for a while, and I had to take the UK citizenship exam, and I've forgotten a lot of it. But there were questions about the education system, which is very very complex. But I thought she got a great education there. I mean, that is the country for it's known for Oxford and Cambridge, and my daughter went to a very traditional school. She did ballet and French, prep school. They also that instead of taking, I think the big jump in this country is taking the SATs and getting into college. Well, they have to do that when they're 12 to get into secondary school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I was taking her to these mock interviews, and I was like, I would not be able to pass that interview. It was just
That is very, well, maybe because it's part of the culture and like expectation, but that'd be very daunting as a 12-year-old to be able to present yourself as if it's a job interview.
yes. I was taken aback. I think it was just maybe not just in London. I mean, I know that they have, different system there, but also, even in this country, it's like you just have to kind of always be on the ball, prepping yourself, marketing yourself, trying to get yourself to stand out till you apply to college. And so it's just a different rendition of that. But I think she got a very good education. Interestingly, they're very they're very traditional in single sex education as well. So she went to an all girls school from the age of 7 till we came back to the States when she was 15. And I really liked that. I didn't think that I would. In Korea, both my parents, did single sex education, separated, and they still do that in England. And I love the fact that my daughter could be in a school, and she went to like a science and math sort of progressive high school. And I love the fact that, girls could feel like, they could excel in these subjects, and there was no implicit bias or favoritism. And I thought that was so brilliant. And if I liked anything about that kind of single sex, track for education, I really liked that, particularly for my daughter.
I mean, that's amazing. So, I mean, thinking about motherhood and career, because now you're in the business full, I don't know if it's full time or whatnot,
Yes.
but, and, it must have been interesting to come at 15. I don't know if she went to an all girls school when she came back, but that transition must have been interesting.
Yes. And I actually probably should have thought more deeply about it because 15 is probably the most sensitive age. Yes, I mean, you will see that it's they think a lot about their identity, and there's this hierarchy, and she had been we had come every summer, to see her grandparents. And I recall when she was younger, she had adopted this very kind of Californian sort of drawly accent because she said, I can't. They made fun of her British accent. I'm like, honey, don't you dare lose that accent. you know?
Trust me, later on, you'll thank mom.
It was a completely different culture for her, and she went into a co-ed school. So that was also very disorienting. So one would think all 15-year-olds have something in common, but she wasn't getting any of the cultural references.
Mm.
And also, you asked me about the education there. She went to an independent high school and she went to prep school, but the great thing is that they didn't test the girls every year. Like, so no one was given like a grade. There were no grades, but they were tested within the class. And they were given, very, very detailed notes on, how they were doing. But I loved that system where you could just kind of focus on, the work in front of you and not have to think about college and where you were going to go to college. And then she came here at 15, and the first conversation she was privy to in the lunchroom is like one of her classmates saying, I want to go to Dartmouth, and it just threw her for a loop. Like,
It
it
was a
was
culture shock.
exactly, it was a culture shock. So she experienced the same kind of culture shock from London to New York as I did from, New York to London. It is a tremendous shock.
Yeah, it's a parallel process for sure. But
Yeah.
it makes her resilient and adaptable, and that's gonna carry her on, even though it feels probably many times awful as a teenager to grapple with those questions.
My pedagogy as a parent was that I wanted to put her in as many different situations as possible ever since she was young. And I think, at this point it's I can see it kind of manifest in her the openness of her mind. But like I'm sorry, getting back to your question about how I ended up back full
Hmm.
time. I have to say that this is a subject that really has to be explored and talked about more because not only is it impossible to get back into the work, the corporate world as a mother who's taken 15 years off. But
Yes.
add to that the technology, the different business speak that is changing more and more rapidly, and weird acronyms. And so, if you don't know, if you were out for 6 months and there's a platform that you should be fluent in and you don't know it, you feel a little kind of backwards, like you're not current. And honestly, if it weren't, if I weren't a Nepo baby and I wasn't coming back to a family business, I mean, there's so much ageism, there's so much competition.
Yeah.
I was a Luddite, and so it's really ironic. I mean, one of the greatest ironies of my life that, before I left London, I'm still asking my husband, what's my password? And I come back and I'm learning these platforms left and right. And, all of, and these virtual terrains are constantly changing. And, people are speaking in spreadsheets and everything is done with spreadsheets and there are 50 million options. And so within that first year, huge learning curve. And then on top of that, being in a field, going from, ancient Greek to beauty marketing and TikTok. I mean, I don't know, like someone up there must have a very dark sense of humor because they're like diametrically opposite. And, but just being privy to this breakneck pace. I mean, this was like 2021 going into 2020 going into 2021. So this was really like when TikTok was taking off,
Yeah. Exploded. Yeah.
exploded, and beauty was like the big thing. And the 12-step program, 12-step
The
beauty
beauty
regimen.
regimen. Hmm.
I mean, that's what I walked into from, honey, what's my password?
Well, I mean, you've done an amazing job. I mean, I think that it is very hard. And now I understand my father-in-law a lot better that he retired right when insurers were like requiring them to do electronic health records. He was so used to bringing his briefcase home and like writing patient notes. And he was like, you know what? I'm done. Like, I don't want to learn this platform and learn how to file, invoices or claims that way. But I do, you know, completely hear you and respect you for jumping back in because regardless of whether or not you had a company that you could work for, it is very, very hard to make even the decision to not have a full-time paying job while you're raising your child. I mean, I think it's the hardest job ever, and you don't get paid or any break time or anything like that. So it is a very challenging decision for many working mothers, working parents. Where do you find the time? And then, in Korea, my friend, right when she had her first child, she's like, it's almost impossible to go back. And she had her second child, and she's very happy to be a full-time mom at home, but it can be very lonely sometimes and isolating.
It was very lonely and isolating, to tell you the truth. And also being an immigrant and being a foreigner. And it never really felt like I completely slotted in to London.
Hmm.
It's a beautiful city and there's so much. It's so rich in history. And I met some great people. But I was a fully formed human being when I went there, and it's hard kind of to adapt. But the being a full-time mother, it's extremely lonely, and I think that sometimes, but also, having gone to college and always being told or having expectations of doing something. I think I met a lot of mothers who were very highly educated and felt slightly kind of demoralized and could
Hmm.
never quite get over that feeling. And yet, I know that there's one independent school in London where, they vet the parents and all the mothers, they have to be at home mothers. They have to be completely invested
Wow.
in taking care of their child. And yeah, it's a full-time job. And sometimes I would do things, I write and, I would do other things sometimes, but I realized that, this is what I call the first virgin energy of the day. If you give it away to something, what you have left is, not the best energy to give to something else. And that's, being a mother in England for 15 years full time, where I rode the red bus and brought her to school. It took an hour. Coming back, it took an hour. Got home and then did the shopping, and I made sure I cooked from scratch. And I'm not a natural cook either. Um,
Well, I'm awful.
and,
My husband
and
does all.
and then, taking the red bus back, going to the school gates, and then coming back, helping them with the homework. It was full on. It was full on, and really looking for some fulfillment for yourself as a mother.
Yeah.
In retrospect, I'm glad that I was almost forced to do that. Like that, it wasn't necessarily a choice, but my husband was working and traveling quite a bit, and just because of visa reasons and such, I had no other choice but to be a full-time mother,
Yeah.
and I'm so thankful that I went through that process.
Yeah. It
Honestly,
teaches you a lot about yourself.
it does. Yes. Yeah.
So, I mean, thinking about, the company and what you've learned over the years when you had to jump back into TikTok, what are some key takeaways that you've learned in terms of marketing a business or sharing, the message on social media and other platforms?
Yeah. It's interesting because, my father always said, Julia, you have merchant's blood. He always wanted me to, go. I guess maybe he knew before I did, but I realized that I actually very much naturally enjoy marketing and branding. And in fact, in America, everyone has to be their own marketer. Even as, and that's what I told my daughter, as she's applying to college. How are you going to brand yourself? There are 50,000 other students who have the same credentials, who are just as intelligent, just as capable. How are you going to brand yourself so you stand out from that crowd? And so I actually, when I was helping her through the process, told her this is like a marketing yourself and branding yourself process. And ultimately, for me, I'm kind of like an authenticity person, and I don't know how to be anything but that because I start feeling very awkward if I'm not, being
It's
true to
cognitive
myself.
dissonance, right? So,
Yeah, or moral injury, or just feeling awkward, not, you know, um, walking the walk. And when we first, when I got back into working with a PR team, we were with a different PR team than we are now. They grouped us into beauty, and so all the unboxing and those types of TikTok videos, the 12-step videos. And I knew right then and there, I was like, listen, we're not just beauty. I know this is like the big hot thing, but we can't compete with these very refined beauty lines. You know, we are wellness, our foot line is kind of our identity, foot health. I kind of wanted to expand outside of sort of the ken of beauty. And also, my brother came up with a line. So what he focused on was just kind of there was a certain pragmatism to the products. He focused on the ingredients. It's an ingredient driven line. He wanted the tools to be really premium and do what it said it would do on the tin. I mean, he thought like a man, in a very practical way. And for the products to really shine and to sort of convey his energy that as the originator and maker that are invested in these products, I had to be true to that and align myself with that. So I was kind of serving the brand and serving what he felt was very important when he came up with the line and these pillars that never changed and never wavered. And I think also, the price point. We were not a luxury brand, and I think the thing that I have just in my heart, and obviously his heart, I love the utility, like the utilitarian nature of our brand. Like anyone can afford these great products, and we're not skimping. But we want everyone to be able to use these things for their own self-care. And it's very accessible. And then we leaned into self-care, collective self-care. Everything is, it's more fun to do things, in a group, like when you're chatting with your girlfriends or having, a wine night or an admin night or, a bachelorette, put on these face masks and these, foot peeling masks and these hand masks. I mean, I think our products really lent themselves very well to this kind of collective sort of hanging out, sort of taking care of ourselves together ethos. And so I leaned into it. And I think these are things that John and I truly, truly believe in.
And that really matters is values driven work and actually living consistently with those who are practicing business. And, the hand and foot cream are just a little goes a long way. So I think when you're talking about affordability and like if the whole family is using one, it'll last quite a bit of time. So I think that there are a lot of benefits to having that collective approach, and especially when it's one of the most, I think, personally feet are kind of like not thought about as much because
Mm.
everything is all about how your face looks. And so I'm just like really glad that that is a focal point because people don't often think about, well, I need to do that before bed versus, put a face mask on. That's great too, but there's
Mhm.
also your
Mhm.
feet.
Yeah, yeah, and feet are they are very much overlooked, and there's a lot of stuff around it, right? There's, the fetish and the
Yeah.
OnlyFans aspect, and there's a lot of weirdness around it. But just practically speaking, I think taking care of our feet is so important. I mean, if you know anything about reflexology, I mean, the pads of your soles or our soles. They kind of are like the control panel to every organ of our body. And just, massaging your feet, it just has a very salutary effect on the rest of your body. And I think if you start kind of losing balance or your foot is hurt and you kind of your body is a little off kilter, like I think over time it starts affecting every part of your body. And balance, I think, is very key to maintaining health.
Yeah. I mean, I have super flat feet and my kids blame me all the time for theirs. And also like I bunions run in the family, so I'm like that's something that could really be an area that people could really work on, because it's just like my mom and my mother-in-law and now my daughter, like when your feet grow, there's some pain points. And so it is something that's less talked about or looked at, and it is really important. So thank you so much for telling us more about your products and how it can help. And also your story is incredible. And I hope you feel so proud. And when your daughter at some point watches clips or shows or whatnot of you, I hope she has an appreciation of all that you've given her and done for her. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It was a real pleasure having the conversation.
Thank you for listening. We would love for you to subscribe to the podcast and join our community on all our socials at colorsuccesspodcast.com. Looking forward to you checking out my memoir, Cancel the Filter: Realities of a Psychologist, Podcaster, and Working Mother of Color, on Amazon and wherever books are sold. I'd love to hear your Cancel the Filter moments.
Well, I can give 'em more, 'cause when I'm on the field, you know it's game on.